Hello, my lovelies. I am the Maeve of all trades, and welcome back to another reading of Knight of Camelot. Once again, Mabon's father was absent for lunch and for supper. What was more, some of his belongings began to disappear. One of his most prized possessions was a mount on the wall holding an ornate dagger that he used to slay half a tribe of goblins in his younger days. The day before, it had been right where it was supposed to be, but when Mabon passed by it again, there was nothing but an empty mount. Most of the servants didn't have an answer when Mabon asked if they had seen her father or knew why he was acting so strange, and the ones that did appear to know something stayed frustratingly tight-lipped. The worst part was that they weren't even subtle when they acted like they didn't know anything. Just like Dorothea, they'd glance around like they were waiting for an attack of some kind, or like someone was listening in. Hell, for all Mabon knew, someone could have been listening in, and she wouldn't have been any the wiser. What made it even worse was that everyone acted like it was business as usual. Something was going on. A blind man could see that, but the only one who seemed concerned about it was Mabon herself. Finally, on the evening of the third day of the servants hiding things from her, and the fourth day of seeing neither hide nor hair from her father, Agatha, one of the younger maids who had been hired when Mabon was perhaps 3 or 4, came with a note from Mabon's father, summoning her to his study. Now Mabon knew something was wrong. Her father's study was one of the few rooms in the castle that was strictly off-limits to Mabon. He only summoned her when he was leaving for a long journey or when Mabon had heavily misstepped. She was suddenly reminded of her conversations with Angus and Thea, and her blood turned to ice. Someone had told, or someone had overheard. He had ears everywhere. He knew that she was asking about him. He knew that she was asking about her mother. She was done for, completely and utterly done for. This was enough to warrant a caning, at least 30 lashes, maybe even a week of starvation. Whatever it would be bad and painful. She swallowed, taking a long, slow breath and letting it out before dismissing Agatha and rising from her seat. The best thing for everyone was to simply accept what her father would give her and continue with her head down and her mouth shut. With another little tremble, she began down the hall. Besides, it was just as possible that he wasn't aware. Perhaps he was just going to tell her that he'd be leaving on another long journey. It would make sense, seeing as his belongings were beginning to disappear. Perhaps it was simply a very long journey and he'd need to take more with him. Though he'd never taken his prized dagger on any of his journeys in the past. Before she'd even realized it, her wild imaginings had carried her directly to the door of her father's study. Another breath in, another breath out. No sense delaying the inevitable. Her knuckles lightly rapped on the heavy oaken door, another little quiver of fear striking up her back as her father's monotone voice sounded from inside. Enter. She took another breath and turned the brass handle, her hand shaking as she crept inside. Despite the fire roaring in the fireplace, the room was uncomfortably dim. Her father was sitting on the plush armchair facing the fireplace, his diary open on his lap and a bottle of ink on the small end table beside the arm of the ornate chair. Despite the fact that he was sitting away from the door, she could tell he was sitting like a wooden soldier rather than reclining. His knees were stiff and his feet flat on the ground. She could just see the corner of his open journals, but the pages were like that of a book in a painting, unmoved and untouched. From the looks of it, the ink of the last entry had already dried. Good afternoon, Father. She broke the quiet majority the crack of the fire had taken over the room. Good afternoon, child, he answered, still not looking at her, his voice as flat as before. Mabon waited for a moment, her eyes wandering to the armchair opposite her father next to the fireplace. Eventually, she'd sit down, but she knew better than to take a seat without her father's invitation. She knew this, but still he waited instead of addressing her, continuing to stare at the fire. Mabon cleared her throat. You sent for me? She asked carefully. They always had their discussions on his schedule, but she couldn't fathom why her usually straight-to-the-point father was taking his time. I did, he replied, continuing to stare into the fire. Annoyance sparked in Mabon's chest, but she kept herself composed. What did you wish to discuss? For the first time in their conversation, for the first time since breakfast 4 days ago, her father turned to look at her. Quite a bit, actually, he replied, the glow of the fire reflecting off the sheen of his dark beard and hair, and his eagle-like eyes. Have a seat. He gestured to the empty armchair across from him. Thank you, Father, she replied with a little bow of the head. He watched her carefully as she walked to the chair and sat herself down, the creak of the wood beneath her feet drowned out by the crackles of the fire and the soft, anxious pound of her pulse at the edge of her hearing. There were questions swimming in her mind like a horde of sharks, but she kept them at bay as she waited for her father to continue his discussion. But he continued to sit in silence. The only movement he made was to take the pipe from the side table and press a pinch of tobacco into the bowl, setting it alight and taking a puff. He inhaled deeply, letting the smoke enter his lungs. His shoulders drooped just a bit as he let the smoke slip from his nostrils. Not in relief, at least not that Mabon could tell. When he'd fully exhaled, Mabon thought he'd get on with what he wanted from her, but rather than begin speaking, he took another inhale. The entire time, he kept his eyes on her. It made her uncomfortable. Not because she knew what he wanted from her. More appropriately, it was because she didn't know what he wanted from her. It wasn't anger. Not that she could tell, at least. She learned over the years how to tell when her father was angry. Both the obvious signs and the more subtle ones. Her father wasn't necessarily a complex man, but he was hardly one-dimensional. She could usually tell by the way his eyes would turn from neutral to sharp, and his mouth would thin to a line with the corners turned down just so. Now his face was smooth. It wasn't happiness, but it wasn't anger. Mabon knew fixating on her father's expression was a good way to make herself paranoid for the rest of the day, but of course, as soon as she came to the conclusion that fixating wasn't the right thing to do, it would be the only thing her mind was going to do. Finally, after a few very long minutes of silence and stares, Mabon's annoyance got the better of her and she found herself snapping, "What did you want from me?" before she could stop herself. As soon as she realized what she'd done, she went pale. Had she any thought in her head, she likely would have started sputtering an apology. But the only thing that managed to make the journey through her mind was how much hell she'd have to pay. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please like if you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment. I always love hearing from you guys. And thank you so much for watching. I have been the Maeve of all trades, and have a lovely day.